Hi there, it's Len Edgerly with the Kindle Chronicles. Welcome. Today is Friday, May 15th, 2020. I am recording in Ocean Park, Maine, looking out at a foggy evening here on the coast of Maine. And I can't even see the water. The fog is almost covered up the sand dune before us, the beach grass. It's a nice night to be indoors, and I have a good show for you. I'm going to tell you about some new Fire HD tablets, which were announced this week by Amazon. I have a giveaway. I guess you might call it a Kindle Chronicle sweepstakes in the tech tip. I've got an item which I don't need. I'm going to make available to the first person who requests it by email. The interview is with James McQuivey of Forrester Research. We spoke with James about a month ago, and I wanted to check back with him on some topics that we didn't get to last time about the pandemic's effect on the media business. And he also had some very original, intriguing things to say about Amazon's strategy during the coronavirus. And I think you'll enjoy hearing that. Let's get started. Amazon on Wednesday of this week, which was May 13th, announced an update for the Fire HD 8 line. And this, in October, there was a similar update for the Fire HD 10. That's the larger of the Kindle Fire tablets. And this was an entirely new Fire HD 8. That's kind of the basic 8-inch tablet. And then they announced a new Fire HD Plus, which has some extra features for $20 more. The HD8 is a great tablet. I have one, and it's a nice size. Sometimes I like to use it to read my Kindle books during the day because you get to see a sepia paper, and if there's any thing to link to in a book, you can get to it really fast on a Fire tablet as opposed to a Kindle. And it's good for watching TV and all of that. So this is, I think of it as kind of the workhorse of the Fire tablets. And I'm glad to see Amazon making incremental improvements to it. Now, they did increase the price of it to $90. It had been $80 in the previous version of it. But that one was last updated in September of 2018. That was when they put a front-facing camera on that was improved, and they also added some storage. This week's improvement includes a faster processor, more memory, more RAM, and a USB-C charging port. Now that means that when you plug in the charging port to this new Fire HD 8, it's symmetrical. There isn't an up and a down like there is on a micro USB port, which you're probably familiar with on your Kindles and a lot of other devices. It seems to be a lot of things are switching to this, and I like it. On the other ones, it's like half of the time you try to plug it in the wrong way and you have to switch it. With the USB-C cable, there's no up or down. They both work just fine. So I think that's a nice improvement. I've made 2 columns of features for the Fire HD 8, which costs $90, and the HD 8 Plus, which is $110. Now, these are both available for pre-order, and they will ship on June 3rd. I've ordered one of the HD Plus ones. I just want to try it out. I'll tell you why that was not an easy decision for me, unlike previous new tablets and devices which I always just jump on. So here's what the basic one, the HD 8, looks like for $90. It's 30% faster because it has a 2 gigahertz quad-core processor, and the previous version had 1.3 gigahertz processor. It has more internal storage. The basic unit is 32 gigabytes of storage, and you can also get one for 64. The existing one had been 16 gigabytes, so that basic storage amount has doubled. The battery life has been increased from 10 to 12 hours, and with the USB-C charging cable, you can charge it in less than 4 hours. You can get micro SD cards to have expandable storage up to 1 terabyte. I think that's I think that's more than it was in the previous one. I love this. This is a feature which is arriving with the new tablets. It's called Game Mode, and it's distraction-free. And what this means is that if you're playing a video game on your tablet, you can set it so there won't be any pesky notifications, emails from your boss or text messages from your boss saying, hey, you may be working at home, but I need you to do something. You'll be saying, no, I'm playing Tetris here, and I'm in distraction-free game mode. So that's something that they've added. I haven't tried Zoom on a Fire tablet, but you can download Zoom and have your conferences there on this tablet, as well as you can set it up as an Alexa device and drop into other Alexa devices like the Echo Show. There is improved Wi-Fi. That's always good. And the way this works is similar to the improvement that they came out in October for the HD10. They put in an extra antenna for Wi-Fi so that if you're holding it in landscape mode, horizontal, there's a different antenna for Wi-Fi activated than if you're holding it in portrait mode. And maybe that's because your hands might be covering up the antenna if you're switching from one side to the other. So anything that improves Wi-Fi connection is a good thing. Same screen as the current HD8. I also love this. Beefing it up with the various improvements, they managed to trim a few grams of weight. This new HD8 weighs 355 grams compared to 363 grams. I'm quite sure that if I had one in one hand and one in the other, I wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But there it is. The engineers always at work trying to trim weight and make things a little sleeker. There is a picture-in-picture mode, and what this means is you can have a small window streaming video while you're browsing the internet or doing something, using some other app. I was interested in some of the coverage of it. There's a screen sharing aspect to these tablets, and they say a tech can guide you through any feature on screen. In other words, they'll say, do you want me to take a look at your screen if you call in with an issue? And 24/7, 365 days a year for free, you can get this kind of support for your tablet. Now, I bet a lot of you remember the Mayday feature, which came out very early on with the tablets, and it was very ambitious, and you actually get to see a tech person who was talking to you and could also control your screen. That they took out the part where you're looking at the person in the little window, but apparently they still have the screen share feature, which is quite robust and certainly useful. Now, on the Apple side, which I'm going to talk about later, you can get screen share for an iPad, and I've had some help on that. But you're paying Apple Care an extra, I don't know, is it $200, maybe more, to get that feature, and it's 3, maybe 4 years is a fixed period of time. But on these tablets, you have free access to screen share tech support, which is very useful. I mean, it's a lot easier to have someone actually see what the problem is that you need help with than by saying, well, what are you looking at now? So that's bravo to Amazon to have that screen sharing feature as still part of how these tablets work. Now, the HD8 Plus, that's the one that's $20 more, so it sells for $110. It has 50% more RAM, and the CNET review that I saw said that makes it a little zippier. So if you have the two side by side, for $20 more, you're going to get something that maybe just seems to... It's a little faster, a little zippier. I guess that's the technical term. You also get 6 months of Kindle Unlimited with with the Plus, and you get more RAM. Oh, I talked about that. It's 3 gigabytes of RAM as opposed to 2 gigabytes in the basic HD8. The other thing that's intriguing is the HD8 Plus is compatible with a wireless charging dock. And I think this is a dock that kind of sets up as a stand, and when it's in the dock, you could use it like an Echo Show. It could be doing video calls with people, and also you don't have to be plugging it in to charge it. It's just picking up the charging capability wirelessly. When this first came out, I could feel my old inclination to say, well, a new tablet, got to buy one. I owe it to my listeners. I also just love seeing a new device show up. But I just bought an iPad Pro, the 11-inch model. And I talked earlier, I've was intrigued at the idea that perhaps it could replace my laptop. So far, I'm thinking that's going to be a stretch. Just the podcasting piece alone, I haven't yet found anything on the iPad that comes near to what I can do here in Logic Pro, which I'm using right now. And the iPad Pro 11-inch is a dream machine. I'm really glad I have it, and I'm doing things with it which I hadn't planned to, but are just wonderful. But the version I got, the iPad itself was $1,099. I got a $129 Apple Pencil 2, and then I got a $299 Magic Keyboard, which has actually a trackpad, so it does kind of act like a computer, a keyboard, and it folds. It's just elegant. The iPad just sort of floats there at different angles, and it's classic Apple design and a really beautiful complement to this high-end iPad. Total for all of that, $1,527. So, compare that with a Fire HD 8 Plus for $110. I mean, it's just kind of a ridiculous difference in price. They're obviously doing very different things, too. They're in no way competing in capability. But now that I am using this iPad so much, I'll get the HD8 to have it and try it and talk about it with you. And there may be some times when I use it, but at this point, my tablet tool of choice is this new iPad Pro, and it is a marvel. The things it can do. For instance, when I'm writing the script or the notes for this episode, I can have half of the screen on a web page where I'm picking up something from a story, and then the other half can be in notes, and I can be writing with the Magic Pencil and nice blue ink, and I can be cutting and pasting and moving around. And so I get that sort of creative feeling that I was really enjoying on the Remarkable tablet, which has an easier feel with the pencil. It feels more like a real pencil, but it's black and white, and it feels like a really crude creating environment compared to creating a note on the iPad Pro. So it's kind of the evolution of my tablet use, but I am very impressed with this iPad Pro, and I look forward to seeing the improvements in the new Fire HD 8, which Amazon announced this week. Well, it's time for the tech tips. I do have a tech tip from Readwise, but first I want to give away an Apple Smart Keyboard Folio for iPad Pro 11-inch, second generation. Now, what happened was I bought the iPad Pro, and it was going to take a month or two, it looked like, to get the Magic Keyboard where I could really start seeing if this thing could work like a laptop. And in the interim, I did want a keyboard, so I bought this keyboard that the iPad Pro snaps together with magnetically, and it has a nice typing keyboard. I paid $179 for it. I won't say that it's like brand new because our new puppy Sophie has done a little bit of nibbling with her tiny little teeth around one corner of it, but it's certainly in good shape for working. It's a pleasant keyboard with good action. It doesn't have the sort of floating angle of the Magic Keyboard or the trackpad. But if you have an iPad Pro 11-inch second generation and you haven't gotten a keyboard yet, stop listening. Go send me an email at podchronicles@gmail.com. Tell me that you'd like the Smart Keyboard Folio, and I will ship it out to you. So may the first person to email me... why are you still listening? You should be sending me that email. It'll be fun to send it out to somebody. Now, for the other tech tip I want to talk about, Readwise, I love. This is it's an app where you feed in all of your annotations that you've done in all your Kindle books. And for me, it's 1,000 books. It's just a ton of annotations. And it's gotten really fast. And each day it sends me a collection of the highlights that I have made in all my books. And it's just fun. I mean, I get to see quotes from books I can't even remember that I read. And they're usually of interest to me because I chose them. And then there's a really easy way I can share them on Twitter. And it's just a rock solid app. And they keep getting better. They're adding new platforms. They can work with Apple Books now and Pocket. And they just keep getting better at it. Now, they sent me an email, and they said that I'm just going to read it to you. I haven't had a chance to try this, but I want to point it out to you in case you're using Readwise or you want to try it. They say, consistently revisiting the best part of our ebooks is great, but how can we do the same for paper and audiobooks? At first, we didn't have a solution for these books. Now we do. You can add paper and audiobooks to a special shelf in Readwise. After doing so, you'll start receiving their most popular passages as part of your daily Readwise, provided we have enough data. It's not the same as revisiting your own highlights, but it's surprisingly close. You can add those books by selecting the Add Highlights menu from the Readwise dashboard and clicking on the paper or audiobooks link. This wouldn't be as satisfying as getting your own personal highlights that you've made in a paper book or some places that you've marked. I don't even know I think there is a way to, on an Audible book, to mark passages that you like. But what they're doing is they're taking the generally most popular passages in books, paper or audiobook, and they're sending you those if you've put a book in those formats in your Readwise dashboard. So interesting way to expand the kinds of information you might be getting from books you read, even though in the non-ebook form, it's not going to be precisely those passages. But I like the style of these guys. They're always improving their product. I've reached out to them numerous times to try to get them to do an interview for the show, and there's some shyness, there's some reason. They're always very appreciative, and boy, sometime ask us again later, and I try another 6 months down the road, and one of these days they're going to surprise me and say, "You bet, Wednesday, let's talk about this whole, the creation of this wonderful app and all the things that they've been doing with it since." I'm very patient. Time now for the interview. We last spoke about the coronavirus era with James McQuivey, Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester Research, just over a month ago. In that amount of time, the world changes quickly these days, so I was glad to be able to reconnect with James this week on Tuesday at his home west of Boston. I began by asking what he expects here in New England this summer in July and August.
Well, July and August are a lot closer than we think, and it probably won't be that different than it is now. It's a very hard thing to come up with a way to create an environment for social distancing that is compatible with many of these activities, even when people say, "Oh, but we're going to be outside," which is good. We're going to be in the sunlight, which is good. We can be 6 feet apart on the beach, which is true. But you have parking lots, you have restaurants, you have restrooms, all of which become congestion points in any beach. You also have a harder time regulating access. Some of our favorite beaches in the region, Good Harbor Beach, some of these places, they would fill up on a typical summer day and cars would park all the way down the street into the adjoining neighborhoods. How do you prevent that? Do you hire a police force to say, okay, the beach is 25% full, we're not allowing more people on the beach? So it's more complicated than I think a lot of people understand when they start agitating for complete reopen right away. That said, just the human spirit is hard to suppress and lock inside a room for very long. So I imagine people are going to say, let's find some creative ways to do at least some of these things. And I applaud that. I think that's necessary. But thinking of it as a switch on or switch off, that binary approach to thinking about it is probably insufficient.
Massachusetts has the third most cases in the country, and how if you were grading our state's reaction to the pandemic so far compared with other approaches in other states, what kind of a grade would you give?
It's really hard to criticize our politicians the way you can in some other states or areas. They didn't flip-flop from this is overblown to, oh no, it's the end of the world, like we saw in some politicians, places like San Francisco and New York. I'd say our governor and the mayor of Boston both came in very early on saying, look, let's just follow the facts. Let's look at what's happening. I think because we had that super spreader event early here in Boston, that was related to the Biogen conference, it woke everyone up pretty quickly. There wasn't a period in which we were uncertain about the gravity of the situation. And that's been good. Also, we are a state and a region where there's so much expert medical care and advice. And gratefully, we have politicians who listen to that advice. So I'd say we've handled it very well. We also have a populace that's comfortable adapting in this way, taking counsel from public officials, health officials, and so on, and not necessarily turning it into a political problem the way some other regions have decided to make this political. So I'd say we're doing well overall. The numbers, of course, haven't been coming down as quickly as we'd want them to. And that just shows you that it would be worse if we hadn't taken the steps that we've taken so far. Because even with the restrictions that we have in place, we still have significant caseloads arriving every day. They're not increasing, but they're not falling to zero quickly either.
I see your Forrester team recently released a report to clients titled "The Future of Work Starts Now." And I think that grew out of an event you had, or this has been the result of some study on the future of work. What can you tell us about the findings, especially given that they have arrived in the midst of the coronavirus?
I was asked back in December, we were looking ahead to 2020, and I was asked if I would be willing to dedicate my time and attention to a new dedicated team at Forrester that would focus on the future of work. Now, talking about the future of work is not a new thing, and it's not that Forrester hasn't been doing ongoing research in automation and in employee experience. We have those streams of research, but we really decided that we needed to combine them into a single thrust and make it very clear that this wasn't just like, look across your portfolio of things you're doing and maybe emphasize employee experience. Maybe you should also understand your approach to automation and how that fits into what you've prepared your employees for. And thinking of it as a grab bag of things you need to do, but instead saying, this is the next thing you need to do. You need to emphasize how you invest in your employees, prepare them for the future of work, because the future of work will be different. Okay, fine. It's December of 2019, and I'm asked if I'd be willing to do that. And I said, I see some wisdom in this. This is a really important thing. Looking ahead for the next decade, we need to invest in this. And so I sat down with the team members that were being asked to join this team, and each one of them I respect tremendously. And I thought, these people are ready to tackle this. What we have ahead of us is a 5-year journey to persuade people that they need to pay attention to this. Think of it, that's the mindset that we had. Mm-hmm. Now, I've been in that situation before. In 1998, when I joined Forrester, my job was to persuade people that the World Wide Web was going to matter to retail, to banking, to travel. It took years to convince people of that. And in there, we had a .com bubble, and so many people said, see, that's it. The internet fad is over. And we knew we were right, and we stuck to our guns. True, mobile happened in 2007. We said the same thing. And it was, in each case, it's a 5-year journey to persuade people that this is really a principle that they have to incorporate into their ongoing business, or they will fail. Well, I approached the future of work the same way. Okay, roll up my sleeves. Let's take 5 years. We're going to persuade people that this matters. Come the end of February, suddenly all the things that we were bringing our research together, adding some new research to make it current, and suddenly coronavirus hits. And we realize in that moment, everything that we're going to try to persuade people to do over the next 5 years is going to become blindingly obvious and suddenly urgent in the next 5 months.
Wow.
So in some way, it's terrible to say it this way, but this initiative, which needs to happen, of companies taking their future of work obligations seriously, their relationship to their employees, their investment in their employees, all that has to happen. And in some ways, the coronavirus, terrible as it is, disruptive as it has been and will continue to be, it actually is accelerating something that companies needed to do. And there is not a single voice that we are hearing that is saying, no, when all this is over, we can go back to treating our employees the way we did before and everything's going to be fine. No one is saying that. So really, we're in this incredible situation of being able to say, look, the future of work, which we've presented as having to continually adjust for external shocks that are going to influence your business. And one of those shocks is systemic risk, which is where the pandemic fits. So Systemic risk was part of our plan already. In fact, we were going to talk about pandemics as one of the things that happens under systemic risk, along with recessions, along with political unrest, trade, all of that systemic risk. Well, we were looking at all that already, and suddenly we're in a situation to say, okay, if we don't have to spend the next years persuading you to pay attention to these shocks, so it's systemic risk, the role of automation and robotics, the rising tide, or even tsunami, we've called it, of employee data, and then the surgence of employee power as a factor that you have to deal with as an employer. If we don't have to persuade you that these four things matter because it's so blindingly obvious now, well, now we got to roll up our sleeves and tell you what to do about it. And so that's what we're turning our attention to, is focusing on what, honestly, we would have had a leisurely couple of year time frame over which we could unveil our research and our recommendations. And now we're having to compress it all because the time is now. The future of work starts now, which is the title we gave that report once we realized that this compression effect was in place.
It reminds me of the dog chasing the car. You were chasing the future, and 5 years away from it, all of a sudden you caught the car.
We caught the car. I guess the good news is we weren't totally unaware of what to tell people to do once they get their teeth on that bumper.
Yeah.
Because we do have the research. I mean, we do know the role of employee engagement in being productive, in retention, in, even just things as obvious as reduced absenteeism and sick leave. All of those things are affected by just simply investing in your employee experience. But we still have to teach people what that means. When you talk about employee experience and engagement, a lot of people think, oh, you just mean trying to make people happy at work. So we got to have, nice events every once in a while, and we have to donate to a local charity. And not that those things are bad. I'm making it sound like those things are bad, but that's not what we're talking about. And so we have to define for people what it means to engage employees, and it has to be engaging employees in meaningful work, meaningful, measurable work, because it isn't meaningful if you can't prove that you accomplished it. And that there's a lot of detail behind that we have to make sure companies appreciate and then can operationalize.
That's fascinating. Well, another area that you've studied your whole time at Forrester and before is the media business and the huge changes that it's undergone because of the internet. And I'm wondering if, as you watch the way news is being covered in this environment, what matters to people who are getting news, the role of partisanship, and actually just kind of the business of media. Small papers seem to be dying off faster because of this. What kinds of trends can you see ahead for that specific industry?
Well, it's an industry that has been under continuous disruption for the last 20 years. And I think the goal for survivors industry is to just make it long enough for some stability to establish itself and then adjust to that new stability. But it hasn't happened. I mean, if we're talking specifically about the news and information side of that business, what people never fully understood about newspapers coming into the year 2000 is that they succeeded largely because of the classified ads, home sales, and car sales. That's the bulk of their revenue. And, those things, that just dried up with the internet. It's not, people like to imagine that in 1995, that somehow people supported their local newspapers, loved them, read them cover to cover. But no, not really. They didn't. They just needed access in case they ever needed to sell a motorcycle or buy a piece of furniture or, look for houses when it was time to move across town. All of that, when that goes away economically, if all you're left with is a sort of, and there's this useful ability for the newspaper to give me some local news and insight, you don't value that as much as you imagined that you did when you strip away the other things that you were actually paying for. And then it turns out that national news, regional news, international news is all better covered elsewhere anyway, and suddenly the local paper's left with almost nothing. And there hasn't been a lot of good innovation. Patch was a company that tried to innovate local news through a sort of crowdsourced journalism approach, citizen journalism approach, as it's often called. all of those things are valiant efforts, and I salute them whenever they are tried. These have been tried in some form or another for several decades now. I salute them, but in the end, people pay for, with their time or their money, what they value on a relative basis. And if you can get something that's roughly as good as what you just got, but you can get it for free, you'll get it for free. And that's essentially what the media business is struggling with overall. Even when you move to the entertainment side of the media business, in order for Netflix and Amazon, who are investing in such, first run, what we would have called first run quality content back in the day, that content, they have to spend incredible amounts of money to make sure that it is so high quality that it exceeds your expectations for writing, for acting, for lighting, for special effects. It's amazing what some of those shows are investing and what they're accomplishing. Really, they're doing some great work, but it just really means that you can get that for pennies on the dollar compared to what it used to cost you to get entertainment in the past. Especially when you think about the very, very low price that you're paying for Netflix compared to cable, or even Amazon Prime compared to Netflix, or Disney Plus compared to either of the other two. And suddenly you're realizing this is not a business where there are a lot of discretionary dollars being directed toward media experiences on the news or the entertainment side. So none of that has changed as a result of coronavirus. All coronavirus has done has made those providers who are in acute financial distress already even more so. And right. So you have more papers turning to the please support us, almost like a PBS fund drive approach. The Salt Lake Tribune has done that. Obviously, there are other newspapers like the Guardian that had started doing that a long time ago. And, and the Guardian's huge. So, that's one way out of this dilemma. The other way is to simply shut your doors and say it's been a good run and we've enjoyed it, which is going to happen to a lot of these. And it's going to happen to digital journalism as well. You've got a lot of digital journalism brands that thought all we have to do if we're a Vox or we're a BuzzFeed is just keep people coming back. But when advertisers are no longer spending, even if advertisers only cut back 20%, it leaves digital journalism, in a huge hole. Either it all becomes teeth whitening ads, or you're running at a deficit and you got to start laying people off. People you weren't paying very much anyway.
Yeah, I've wondered if changes in patterns of work that would result in less commuting, more working at home, and therefore less time where you're really eager to listen to something like a podcast or an audiobook. If you start seeing a plateauing of the up until now really rapid growth of Audible and podcasts and that whole kind of listening mode of consuming media.
Yeah, I have some insight in particular into NPR data, and that's their biggest concern right now because they do very, very well among commuters. And it's because they have that time, morning and night, or morning and evening, to listen to All Things Considered and Morning Edition. And once you remove that time, and that time is spent, maybe you're doing your yoga to try and deal with the stresses of this moment, or maybe you're getting your kids' tablets logged into their online school, whatever it is, you're not just sitting there for 30 to 45 minutes ready to hear what they are going to tell you from NPR. So I think that is going to be a significant problem for audio because podcasting trails in the wake of that kind of experience. Really, when this ends, an end is maybe an optimistic term to even use, but when we are through the bulk of this experience, there will be some branded players who are gone completely. And that's true in hotels. It's true in retail. We're seeing bankruptcies, Macy's and others. We're going to have a very different world coming out of this. And whether it's just that the brand disappears or the format that brand represented disappears, that's what we have yet to see. And I don't know those answers just yet. But obviously movie theaters are a format that if they can survive the next year, and then even who knows if they have to still deal with restrictions for the year beyond that, will they survive? Will there be as many theater chains as there are today? It's a fair question. But then the even fairer question is, will consumers just get in the mode of, I want to watch that first run movie and I'm going to watch it at home and pay $25 to stream it and then I don't own it. And if I decide to own it later, I'll have to pay separately for that. But it's still cheaper than what it would cost to take my family to the theater to watch it at the theater. So those kinds of models, that's why there's so much contention right now between Universal over their release of Trolls and then all of the news they tried to make around Trolls to say, hey, this was a great model. We're probably going to do this again in the future, even after coronavirus. And the theater chains, of course, said, you can't do that to us. We have this agreement that you depend on us, we depend on you. And so we'll see how that all works itself out. But all of it, of course, is dependent on the timing of this virus.
Yeah. There was an interesting piece by Scott Galloway I saw today and forwarded to you that he was saying that Amazon is building the first vaccinated supply chain and referencing things like the creation of an actual COVID-19 testing lab in-house and spending $4 billion of what would otherwise be next quarter's earnings to protect employees and customers. And he was making a pretty bold claim for the significance of this, comparing it with Amazon Prime, with when Apple decided it was going to have its own stores. And when I see Bezos making a move like this, I have this mental image of him taking his chips when he sees an opportunity like the internet. Let's found Amazon and let's respond to coronavirus in a way that's big and bold and really kind of motivated by values, putting all his chips into the center of the table. But are you seeing Amazon's initiatives as they have been discussed recently, and as that kind of an opportunity for the company to become quantum level more dominant than it even is now?
So first of all, your observation on Bezos' style is 100% correct. This is a man who perceives structural shifts in any economy or any marketplace and says, this is going to tip the structure of all of commerce in this sector, and I need to be in on it. I mean, that's where AWS came from. It's not just the original Amazon, but AWS was every business in the world is going to need some kind of cloud service provider, and all the current cloud service providers are still treating it like this very expensive high-end service that you have to spend weeks talking to a salesperson to get your deal and your annual license. And his model was get your credit card, hit AWS, and sign up for $25 on day one. So yes, that is his style, and it is to be applauded 100%. I also always have taken great pleasure in watching him tell Wall Street that he does not care one whit about their expectations of profit. Yeah, and I have been quoted. Yeah, exactly. I have been quoted over and over in the last 22 years when someone says it's finally time for Amazon to pay the piper. Wall Street's not going to give them this runway anymore, are they? And I have been quoted over and over saying, nope, you are going to be amazed. Amazon is going to continue to consume its profits in search of more customers, deeper relationships, and so on. And I think that's wonderful. First of all, anyone who thinks that Wall Street doesn't need to be shaken isn't paying close attention. So good for him. Now, I know I'm putting myself in weird political categories by cheering on Jeff Bezos on the one hand and then saying, yeah, Wall Street had it coming on the other. People seem to perceive that those are incompatible statements politically. I'll toss the politics out the window. I don't care. I just know that we're going to be a healthier economy. We're going to be better people if we have a more fluid economy that's based on actual information and actual demand meeting supply and so on. And that's exactly where Bezos sits. Now, he is in this very strange circumstance of saying, I thought all I had to do was reduce the friction of commerce and that I would just continue to win and win and win. And yeah, eventually regulators would look at that with some concern. But that's what I need to do. Well, suddenly he's realizing that there's this external force of the coronavirus, which is creating a new kind of friction. That friction resides in every single constituency that he has to deal with. It is employees who are afraid to come to work. It is in customers who are afraid to take delivery of packages. I mean, there are people who will do a full disinfectant process on any package or anything that comes in the mail because they're so concerned about surface-based transmission, which, the science of that aside, that's a legitimate thing that Amazon has to be concerned with. If we can deliver the package in 2 days as originally promised, which is now becoming more and more the thing, now that we're 2 months into this, they're getting back to their 2-day delivery promise for more products. But if it takes 2 days to get to your house, that means that it was touched by somebody very recently, including the delivery person and some warehouse individuals. And so do you let it sit on your porch for a couple of days to clear out? Those are things that some people genuinely are considering when they're choosing whether to buy from Amazon. So Bezos has to say, here's a new source of friction. It is end-to-end friction. It exists in every part of my business. It's going to influence the way labor organizers come in and tell my employees that they need protection from me. It's going to influence the way the media cover me, as we've already seen with 60 Minutes. It's going to influence the way regulators take a look at me. And so it is probably the most rational thing he has ever done to say, I'm going to spend billions and I'm going to solve the problem. Now, whether it'll take only billions, whether it's going to take a year, all of that's just operational. But the concept, remove this friction to the point where we can not only resume business, but now become even more dominant because no one else will be able to match this. That's a very real outcome for Bezos. And I think he'd be a fool not to go for it, just like he would have been a fool not to go for the Kindle or AWS or all the other big bets that he made, where he saw structural change happening in the market and he decided to be that change rather than to respond to it.
It strikes me too that there's a fascinating opportunity with his partnership with Berkshire Hathaway and Chase, taking care of the medical care for the employees of those companies. And Atul Gawande, a really smart guy in Boston, is heading it. And that's been sort of moving along quietly since they organized it a couple of years ago.
Too quietly for my taste.
In what way?
When they made the announcement, they had the opportunity to say, we're ready to change the world. You can either change with us or not. And instead, what's happened is it's allowed a lot of people to sit back in traditional healthcare, in pharmacy, and these other businesses that are going to be impacted by it, to say, oh, sure, they're going to find out how hard it was. A lot of fanfare. They brought in Atul Gawande. They brought in they bought up these companies in the pharma side, PillPack, and so on. And then they're going to find out that this is actually harder. It's too hard for them. It's a bridge too far, so on, so on, and so on. And I think they should have gone out from the beginning saying, we want this to change the world and we want to change it in 12 months. And here's what we're going to do. So I actually think that they didn't play that one very well. And either it'll allow that prophecy that they're going to find out that this was harder than they thought to be true, or at least appear to be true, or they'll walk away from it and cite some other excuse. But in the end, nothing that they're trying to do requires the invention of completely new technology or processes. It's a matter of money and will, and I think they needed to put up both, and maybe they still will. Interesting.
Churches, schools, all the organizations that have switched to Zoom. I attend AA meetings, and they're fascinating to see people move from the halls of churches to the Hollywood Squares grid of people talking. What do you think the experience that has been so widely shared, and probably will be for the coming months, when we get back together in those kinds of groups, whether it's schools or churches or other, having had the experience of relating digitally, do we simply say, boy, I'm glad that's over, and now we're going to go back to our regular chairs and converse with each other in the usual way? Or are in some ways our ways of communicating with each other and supporting each other in groups being rewired because of this dramatic shift to online?
It's interesting. I have a lot of these conversations internally at Forrester as well as with clients. And it's interesting to hear the way people approach it. People will make these declarative statements like humans are social beings. They're going to want to recongregate, which I completely agree with on some level. Other people will say this changes everything. It creates a completely new normal, which I also agree with. What I tell people who are interested to know is not my secret sauce, but I guess I'll call it a secret sauce for approaching anything this complex has always worked. And it's simply draw a normal curve in front of you on the piece of paper or in the air and say to yourself, all right, what are the tail ends likely to do? The most extreme on one direction which are people who are going to come right back. They're going to cancel all their social media accounts. They're never going to be in Zoom again. And then the other side, people who are going to say, you know what, I rather like this. I don't ever want to see humans again in the flesh. And, ask yourself, sure, if it's only 2% on either tail end, which is what we're talking about when we're talking about a normal curve, then sort of back off from those extreme positions and try to imagine how it all begins to mix in the middle and try to describe, all right, what is the balance that's going to happen between people who are just to one side and people who are just to the other side? And we're seeing some of that. We're seeing people who are, ambivalent about face mask wearing in public spaces. Either they feel like they're being judged by other people who wear masks, or they're being judged by people who don't. And those are more middle of the road. Not talking about the people on the extreme ends on the face mask question who, hurl verbal epithets at each other over just the simple act of trying not to infect someone, which seems rather sad. But if we're looking at that normal curve and you say to yourself, yeah, most of us are going to have some version of what we did before come back into our lives, and we're going to integrate it with a lot of the things that we just learned. I mean, really, the shift to virtual engagement is something that was happening anyway and was going to take the next 10 years, maybe not 5 years like I was talking about the future of work things, but 10 years for sure. 10 years from now, we were going to be a much more digitally engaged people, probably with better technology 10 years from now than we have now. And that's for some people, that's going to just happen a lot faster than it would have otherwise. And for some people, there will be a little bit of a backlash, but they're still going to retain the best bits. They're going to keep, I'm going to keep my Zoom account. I'm going to, maybe next time I call grandma to wish her happy birthday, I'll use Zoom like I did this time instead of a phone like I did last time. And that's where most people are going to end up, in some kind of mix in the future. That's why it doesn't really do us a lot of good to predict some big dramatic change or some big dramatic backlash, other than to set the table for the actual conversation about what happens in the middle, because it's the middle where the bulk of business is going to be affected. And if you just go back to Bezos and Amazon, one of the things that they can count on is that people are largely going to come back to buying online. Some people, however, are going to have shifted a significant portion of their shopping to online, and they're going to keep it that way. And that includes Whole Foods consumers who are, using Whole Foods for grocery and so on. So Amazon it's another reason to invest in the end-to-end protection of its supply chain from a COVID perspective, is to make sure they retain those people, because you don't want them to walk away and say, wow, now that I've learned how to do that, I'm going to start Instacarting a lot more. You want them to come back and say, all right, Amazon, you're my friend. We're going to keep doing this. And that's really a good way to look at it. Now, I'm talking about commercial things, but you brought up schools and you brought up churches. That there's really just a pure scientific question that needs to be answered there, and we don't have the data for it yet. Which is, I'm talking about what preferences will eventually emerge. But in the meantime, before preferences can even matter, we have to figure out what transmission is like in certain contexts. And, you hear some people arguing that children aren't at risk, so we can have everyone go back to school, even if their teachers might be at risk, which is a little callous, maybe more than a little. But the real question that science can help us with pretty quickly, and the studies are starting to mount, is that closed spaces where there is recirculated air are the super spreader locations. Add to it any event where people have to expel air quickly or loudly, so shouting, like in a basketball arena, or singing, as if you followed the choirs that have around the world that were super spreader events, where half of the people who attended an hour-long choir practice all got sick, or even boisterous family gatherings where people are guffawing and embracing. It's not so much the embrace, it's the guffaw that increases the likelihood of transmission in the closed space where the air is being recirculated. So as that evidence comes up, it means that schools and churches are going to have to look at this question. Can you go to church and worship with no one singing? And in some churches, the answer is yes. In other churches, the answer is, well, it's not worship if you can't sing. Other situations like the school. What does the school's AC system tell you about the likelihood of virus being recirculated through the environment? Well, you may have to change the way those AC systems work. So there might be a massive retooling of filtration and bringing fresh air into the AC system rather than recirculating it, although that's incredibly expensive because then you have to cool that air down or warm it up depending on the season. These are all manageable issues, but they're not quickly manageable. So schools that want to be open in September, it's going to be very risky. I think most schools will try, and most jurisdictions will find some kind of bump in contagion during that time period, and we'll have to do some adjusting to what that means. Will you have half your school come on Wednesday, and the other half come on Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday is everybody's day off while you work on handing in your assignments? It's a very possible outcome, and it reduces the likelihood of spread. It allows you to manage the environment a little more carefully. It also gives you a day, Friday, in which to completely disinfect the building for the next week. All of these things are doable and very likely that we're going to have to deal with them all throughout the end of the year, which is exactly why Facebook and Google have announced that they will not be asking their employees to return to work before the end of this year for those people that do work from home. And Twitter has said they will never ask people who can work from home to come back to work. They've decided that, already done. So, that those kinds of considerations are going to weigh in. And, you and I can be talking about this for many, many months to come because that's how long it takes for this to be processed.
Well, our two alma maters, Harvard and Brigham Young, which would you expect to open up the widest and the soonest between those two great institutions of higher learning?
Brigham Young University in the middle of Utah, it's a lower population area. The county where it's located has only had 11 deaths from coronavirus. And it's not just because of the population. It's because it's just because the density of the population more than the number of people present, which of course those are related. So I have a feeling, and I have a son who attends there right now. So I have a feeling that they'll be ready to open again in September, but they will have restrictions on common areas in particular. And they'll say, come to class with a mask, sit 2 seats apart from people, which might be a challenge in some rooms. So they're going to have to figure out how to schedule that. They might, again, move to this thing where they say, look, if it's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, Monday you're here, Wednesday you're here, Friday you're at home. They're going to have to explore those things as a way to manage the capacity of students flowing through the quad, flowing through the bookstore, and especially when the weather gets adverse and no one wants to walk across the campus, they'd rather walk through the buildings to get from one area to another. But somehow we're back in a congested environment. So that's a learning curve, but it's not an impossible one. So I expect Brigham Young to be able to reopen in September and just learn from its own self. I don't know about Harvard. I mean, as you've seen from Stanford, MIT, Harvard, all of these schools, they've been hit pretty hard, number one, because of where they're located. They are also subject to a lot of critique because they're financially stable to a degree that other universities are not, and that they could take their time to get it right. And they're also experimenting with online learning to a very high degree. iStanford is a big initiative that's being covered right now as a possible way that some classes might be shifted through the semester. So you could imagine in the fall semester, a student that has one class that's in person and one class that's half and half, and then 2 classes that are purely virtual. Now, then the question is, does the student feel good about spending $50,000 a year to have that experience? That's a very important question.
Yeah, exactly. Well, last question. I was wondering if your experience at home, you've been working at home, I've been working at home, and it's been going on for weeks into months. If you picture yourself 5 years out from now and you think back on this time, what do you think you'll miss the most?
Miss about what we're doing right now.
Yeah, and this way of living and just the radical change of it. Some things we won't miss.
I haven't set my alarm clock in 2 months. Because I don't have to get up at 5:30 so that I can get in a run so I can make sure the kids are up and off to school and then get some things done before I have to start my meetings. Even when I'm working from home, I still have to do all of those other things before I can start my job from home. Now the kids' classes start later. If they don't get started with a good breakfast, they can come down and snack between classes. So it's just the whole rhythm of life changes. I know my kids are healthier because they're sleeping more. That I know. And we're not letting them stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning playing video games like some people I've heard. I'm sure they would like that if we let them. But really, letting them sleep more and benefit from this time is important. You and I have talked before about sleep. I already prioritize my own sleep, so I'm not sleeping more, but I am sleeping without the clock. And that's just such an interesting benefit. I mean, I wake up, I sense the light in the room, and I say, it's time to get up. And I don't even know what time it is for sure. That's been very nice. And I would like to preserve that. We'll see. My youngest is 12 going on 13. So we've got another 5 years of having to get him to school, assuming that going back to school occurs. But I think once we're to the point where we don't need to make sure kids are meeting certain arbitrary schedules, I'm going to program my life so that I don't ever have to use an alarm clock again, I hope.
Ooh, that's a great goal. There's just something so freeing about it. You're in a more natural connection with your life, just with that simple freedom from an alarm clock.
I'm probably fortunate in that regard, in that, I married a woman who can't really stay awake past 9:30 at night. So it's not like I want to stay up late alone.
Yeah.
And what am I going to do? Watch a movie by myself? I guess I could, but I think that helps. I think other people need the alarm clock as a way to force themselves to go to bed at night, and so I have empathy for that. And honestly, if I were still reading physical books, which I haven't done for a while now, and that I will confess, if I were still reading physical, well, I do have one on my bedside table that I do read occasionally, but it's the bedside table reading before you go to bed that if I did stay up late, it was because I was in the middle of a really great book I didn't want to put down. And as enjoyable as that is from a reader's lifestyle, it does harm the sleep. Right. And since I can do audiobooks while I run in the morning, and I can use Kindle books throughout the day and snippets here and there, I'm doing less reading at night. And that I think that's an interesting, I guess that's an interesting thing for me to consider. I sort of imagined I would go back to reading, in my bed as I'm getting ready to go to sleep when life settled down and we entered something close to retirement. But now I'm not sure I will. Physical books, paper books may not make a comeback in my household, even though for the longest time I romanticized that idea.
Yeah, fascinating. I have been speaking with James McQuivey, Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. Thanks very much, James. Always good to talk with you.
Thank you, Len.
That's it for this week. Be well. Thanks for listening.